And okay, so maybe Shani, you want to ask some questions before I can come to a conclusion about all this.
Well, first of all, thank you so much. This has been quite amazing and eye-opening, I'm sure, for the students, and hopefully a bit inspiring as well. I can't, not have you talk about the museum that burned down, the process that you called data archaeology. I think it's really interesting, and though not necessarily done in the classroom, could inform some work that could be in the classroom. So whatever you can share about that would be really interesting. And if you can also comment about your M-Babel project. I mean, it's the politicians is a bit like that, but it would be nice to show the students the process of generating articles on the go for a variety of topics. It doesn't necessarily have to be politicians, right? So
Sure. Okay, so let me go again. Sorry, this is going to be Portuguese. So at least it's not ancient Greek. So on Wikipedia in Portuguese, zoom in. If you do search for Museu Nacional, you reach this page, which is a wiki project on this museum that was one of the most important museums in Brazil that was destroyed in a fire in 2018. And in this moment, as we Brazilians, I would say people everywhere were watching this, I don't know, it even makes me emotional when I see this because it was really intense. I think I didn't sleep for like a month doing this work. So this picture was actually contributed to Wikipedia or to the Wikimedia project by a friend of mine who was able to reach the case. So again, this was a really important museum in Brazil that was considered the most important museum in Latin America for science. It had the largest insect collection in the world. It was really, really very important. And so it was completely destroyed. There were millions of items, millions, dozens of millions in the collection that were destroyed. And at some point, we thought we Wikimedians could actually make a change in the way that we could revive to some extent this museum digitally. And we started this wiki project. This was done a little after, like I think less than a month after this is the page, but it was already happening. And Wikidata was very important, really important, not only to create content, though it was important also in this sense, but also to organize these 22 and more volunteers. These are the 22 that actually signed up to do the actual work as we were campaigning for people to donate pictures they had taken inside the museum. Because among stuff that was destroyed, they were also destroyed the servers where all the files, and they were the only place where the digital files of the items of the museum were located, were destroyed. So basically this museum disappeared. And we didn't have any way of finding these pictures. And people donated. So again, this is very small, but some people show several items. People donated 4,000 images to the Wikimedia project as we were campaigning. And the whole task was, okay, so how are we going to use our Wikimedia capacities to actually improve content on this museum so we can actually try to make it live again. So this is a page on Wikipedia that actually compares what exists on Wikipedia. So this is Wikipedia in Portuguese, in German, in English, in French, in Spanish, in Catalan. So people were coming from several countries So they included the countries that they were coming from. So these are the Wikidata items for each one of the I don't know, content units that we cared about in this project, the number of statements, and this symbol here is when there is a picture on the item. And this was a process of coordinating. So this table was generated and it's automated as a way of improving the coordination of these 22 and more editors that were working on building this content now on Wikipedia. So each one of these lead to, let me open here one that I'll show you something. So those weren't created on Wikipedia, they only exist on Wikidata. So there are several, so we were able to create a lot of items. Let me show you one particular case, which is this room. So this is the room called Kumbu, which was of an African Brazilian room. This was a very important throne for the African Brazilian communities. And the way that we tried to work was to recreate the room on Wikipedia. So as people were donating images, we were able to identify the items. So if you look at this picture, you actually see that 3 of the items appear on it. So the sandals, this thing that I forgot. So the sandals are here. This is the royal sandals. I think it might be this one. So this bag, or it might be a different one. So it may be below. So we were trying to locate each one of the items based on pictures that people were donating. And sometimes, and this is, so just actually open this one so you can see. And of course, what is dramatic is when you don't have a picture, like on this one. So when there is no picture, what is probably gonna happen is there will never be a picture. So it's basically lost forever. But in several cases, we were able to actually pretty well identify on this digital work, which I've called digital archaeology, each one of the items on this room, and this goes, this is a very long. So if you look at this particular item that we've located, just to give you a sense of the work. So this one, which is very important for several reasons, it's a Brazilian mythological god, was located here on a picture that this user donated part of the campaign. So we weren't very interested, of course they are here, but we didn't have information on the others, whereas this one was very important because there was even a PhD dissertation on it. And the only image we have of it came from finding it on these 4,000 images on this very small shelf, and then cropping it and then providing it for Wikipedia and Commons forever. So this was a strategy to make this as we could. I think this is at the same time a very impressive but also very sad work that we've done to recreate this museum that was completely devastated and lost. This is the museum before it was destroyed. You can see it here. And then there were other activities that connected to Wikidata. So I'm opening here the actual work that was done, for instance, on using some technologies that were developed. This is Tabernacle, which is an application that enabled people that were not Brazilians being able to contribute, as we were, for instance, needing descriptions in several languages, and people could actually see each one of the Wikidata items more clearly and improve them. This is, again, this is the same room. This is the case that we've worked more intensely. So I'm showing it because it's the best one, but of course it's an uneven result based on the information that we were able to collect. And so this one is basically looking at particular, so it's less interesting, but this one is very interesting because it's among the things that we've digitally saved were some very few digitizations, so only 5 basically, that were done, and they were all worked on through Wikidata, and this is an automated list. And you can actually write, if you are interested, for instance, let's say you, so I'll actually answer 2 questions in one. Let's say I want to create a Wikipedia article. This one's probably, this is a very famous book, so this one should exist. But let's say I want to create a new entry on this particular book. This is the tool called Babel that Shani just mentioned. So I can come here, use the Wikidata item, write, this is a book, and generate a draft. This draft is being saved on my sandbox. That just means sandbox in Portuguese. And it's basically data coming from Wikidata. So it's not perfect data. It's not perfect. You see, it's not even very pretty. But the idea of this tool that I'll show you in more detail just after that is to give a sense that when people reach the point on which they need to write a Wikipedia entry, the page is not blank. Because when a page is blank and you need to write, you actually blank yourself. And it's easier for people to write when there is already something that they can improve. And this something is what this tool, Babel, is actually creating for several kinds of articles we were interested in expanding, most importantly in education programs. So this is the page of the tool. It exists in other languages, it exists in English, but I think it also exists in French. And basically you can go here, look at templates. So let's say I want, so this is artwork. So I want to write an article with an example on an artwork of which I know the Wikidata item. I can just come to this template and then, for instance, have a first draft, including this info box, which is a pain to write, or even here, this is an audio file that describes, for accessibility reasons, this painting and the structure of what an artwork entry on Wikipedia should be. So it should have a description, a context, an analysis, an understanding of the reception, other links on Wikipedia, some references. It brings you some categories that sometimes are easy to forget, or portal that could be interesting to connect with. And I can do this kind of structured drafts for museums, for libraries, for archives, for theaters, for books, for movies, for earthquakes, for newspapers. I think I can do it, we forgot to add, with universities. And this is the more complex use case, which is elections, because when we are dealing with elections, we are actually bringing a tree of items. So each one of the entries on elections that also use this technology that we've developed as part of my lab. It was done by a user named Erika Azelini, who was initially an undergrad of mine and then became a graduate student in my lab, and is a very engaged person in the Wikimedia community in general now, that she's not in education programs anymore. She's actually leading education programs. And the structure is you are actually activating 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 Wikidata items when you want to create one item, one entry on an election. So this is way more complex. It involves what we call here in computational journalism, creating an ontological model, which is how you're going to parse different layers of content to generate, I don't know, the solution of the need we've envisioned, which was to create entries on elections. So I guess these are the answers. I'm sure you have another one, Jim.
Before I go into other questions, I'm sure some of the students will be curious about the museum that burnt out and the work that you've been doing. This was also crowdsourced, so you've kind of requested the general public in Brazil to donate pictures, and they did. I guess I'm wondering, first of all, what kind of impact your work had inside Brazil? Did that work inspire another layer of work after that? Is it still ongoing? Is it still an ongoing effort to continue, or you kind of took what people donated at that time? Because I think it was, when was it? It was September 2018, if I remember correctly. And so 2 years later, what's the status on this project, and what was the impact?
Okay, so
I mean, the impact, let me just rephrase, there's a huge impact of just doing what you did, but I'm wondering if there was a ripple effect from that work.
Okay, so these are actually, you're asking me a political question, because this is a public museum which was under the connection or the supervision of the federal government. And the destruction of the museum happened just after the federal government had closed the Ministry or the Department of Culture in Brazil. And there were several warnings that this was going to happen. And to some extent, this work that we did was, I would say, at least at that time, by the government, not well received, because we, at the same time as we were improving content and digging information, we could actually find their fault on what had happened. And it's not only them, of course, it's a very complex case in which it's a lack of investment, lack of leadership in who was involved, but it was a process of investigation. So I don't think we actually had a very tough, I was leading this particular project, having tough meetings with representatives of the government to the point in which, okay, we stopped. It was impossible to work with them because they were always trying to use what we were doing as, okay, this is a response of the government to what was being lost. Okay, so this is not the narrative that is actually true. This is not going to happen. And again, this was a very tough moment for the Brazilian Wikimedia community that I won't go into details, but it was, again, not an easy time. And I don't think it was, as I said, I think it was important, even symbolically, to say that, okay, so we can act quickly, we can save what we can, but I don't think it was that impactful, just because we were constrained by reality. We didn't have any prior involvement with the museum. It was a sense in which we actually face our limitations. So I live in São Paulo, this museum was in Rio, and of course there is a limitation on what we can do, and I think we all actually do a lot. We work with a lot of GLAM institutions. We have really large programs, but we can't do them all. And this was one of the cases that was part of our list, but we never reached it. And I now live with this feeling, which is a permanent feeling, that okay, if we don't do this glam now and we bring it, because it involves a lot of volunteer time and engagement and going to the places and, I don't know, negotiating partnerships, and though there is no necessarily money involved, it has a lot of skepticism involved, and those are very long process. But now they are always felt like urgent needs, because this museum that we didn't connect with because okay, we have other things going on, we are tired, might be the next one to disappear. And museums and archives disappear in Brazil and in other third world countries all the time, because they are shut down. Just to give a figure, we know from other people doing research, again, this is the case of Brazil, but it's, yes, it talks about the world in the South in general, the global South, is only 1% of cultural institutions in Brazil have one item of their collection digitized. So in a world in which everyone could have a cell phone which can actually lead you to take pictures, this is not happening for cultural institutions in this country, and which creates a really distinct role for the Wikimedia community that lives in Brazil, about this urgency and about this need not to basically. I always go to this, so this is a sidetrack comment. I always go to these meetings to talk about, okay, so what cool stuff museums and archives and libraries are doing in the world, and the burden of leading the process is always located on the employee. And in the case of Brazil, which I understand should be the case in Latin America, in Africa, in many countries in Asia, this cannot be true, because there is basically no employee to locate the burden. So the burden needs actually to be, either we stop, we don't do any kind of cultural partnership, or the burden comes to the Wikimedia community. It's very different when you are in a rich country where there is basically no need. Of course, there is burden and it's very challenging, and there are pioneers in this process, but the burden can be, when I talk the burden, it's the work, basically the tables you need to go through and check and recheck to actually include content on the Wikimedia project can actually be shared by the institution and by the volunteers who are involved. And this is not the case in Brazil. So we've been in several museums in which we take all the pictures, we build the inventory of the museum. So we just go there and we do what is needed for the museum and for the Wikimedia project. So this was a long answer, sorry.
No, this was an excellent answer, actually, and a very true one to a very complex situation. So thank you for sharing your thoughts on it. I think what you're describing is how, again, it's things that you said at the beginning, how impactful the work of a student can be in that sense of really not only rewriting of your own country, but actually making sure that you're curating the history of your country, your heritage. And so in that sense, you talk about then how you don't have the resources in your country to basically do that work. And I can definitely see, doing and just duplicating it in other places in the countries, in other places, in other universities, and if every course was to do something like that, go to the local museum, to the local library, to the local archive, and starting to do this. So while you have been a bit pessimistic in that sense of saying, the work doesn't really have impact, I beg to differ. I think that type of work has inspired and will continue to inspire generations to come, and not only in Brazil, but I think worldwide, the coming together towards what happened and just using Wikimedia projects to recreate, to reconstruct, to recurate, um, will is just an example that lives very vividly to everyone who heard that story. So you're basically retelling stories with data, which is one of the most interesting things that I think everyone who's doing work on Wikidata can be doing, right? Is to tell stories with data.
Yeah.
So I guess what I want to say is thank you for all the work that you've been doing, and thank you for sharing these stories with us. I'm really hoping the students will find some type of inspiration either from one project or the other. You're doing so much. So I hope everyone can find something that they relate to. And yeah, I look forward to keep seeing what the Brazilian community comes up with, because it's inspiring work. And some of the things, especially as a community, like you said, not the US, not the most established financially, with political issues in the country, what you've been able to accomplish is really amazing. So keep doing the good work that you've been doing, and thank you for sharing it with the students. I am on the habit of, although we are pre-filming all the interviews and all the talks with external guest lecturers, um, that opens in class, the students will have an opportunity to ask questions, or and if they do, I will forward it to you and you can answer them, and it will be in our class forum. And yeah, at least some of what you're doing will be spread around in Israel as well. So thank you again, and we really appreciate you taking the time in these crazy circumstances of COVID-19 to basically talk to us.
Of course. My pleasure, Shani. And I think your students are very lucky, because you might not know, but Shani is part of these people that really inspire me. So this is, again, always when she and I share the opportunity of talking together, I always say, okay, I feel like I'm talking to my boss. So I hope your students really have this feeling and this really real sense that they have a magic opportunity to have you as their professor for this course, and particularly for this course because you are leading a lot of these processes, and you can count me on your projects, and in this particular week to answer eventual questions from your students. I'm available, and thank you.
Wonderful. So thank you again, and blessings from Israel, and stay safe and healthy, all of you.
Good. So
We're